this evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amanda Newell. I'm with Cascadia Conservation District, and my colleague Kirk is also here. So we're hosting this series, and we just want to say a thank you to the Washington Department of Ecology for funding our time to put this together and coordinate with our awesome speakers that you'll be hearing from throughout this series. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Cascadia, just a little more about us. We're non-regulatory. We're here locally in Chelan County, and our mission is to encourage wise stewardship and conservation of all natural resources in Chelan County. We're governed by a board of supervisors, and then we have a staff that have all different specialties. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the programs here in just a minute. But we really do work very closely and collaboratively with local landowners and residents, and we're all about meeting the community conservation needs. So feel free to reach out to us with any conservation concern or project you're interested in on your property, and we're happy to let you know about the programs that we offer. And then we also have a lot of really great partners. So even if it's not something that we have funding or program for, we can get you connected with someone who does. So again, just kind of briefly going through some of our programs. We have agriculture, we do irrigation efficiencies, soil health, wildlife and pollinator habitat. We also do some urban agriculture. You see there's some raised beds. We've done those in community gardens around the area. We also offer archaeological services for folks doing any work. We would have our archaeologists come up ahead of time to do surveys and make sure that there's nothing being disturbed under the ground before projects take place. And then we do a lot of community outreach and engagement. So website, social media, we do a print newsletter. We go to a lot of community events, host workshops like this, and we are really trying to up our bilingual outreach. We have two bilingual staff on, or two bilingual folks on staff currently, and working on getting some other staff a little more knowledge on Spanish speaking as well. And then we have a large wildfire preparedness program. So we do fuels reduction cost share. We have chipping and yard waste disposal days. We've started just in the last couple of years doing prescribed fire, learn and burn. So we actually have folks come out onto private property and put fire on the ground and trying to use fire as a means of keeping the forest maintained in the historic way that it was. And then we do have post-fire restoration programs as well. Stream habitat restoration, we do native planting, riparian areas, and we install beaver dam analogs, and then other stream and wetland type restoration projects as well. And we've also gotten some students involved in some of those, which has been really fun, having them come out and like do the weave for some of the beaver dam analogs. And I don't think we might have a picture of that here in a bit on the youth ed. So yeah, the one down there with the students. So it's been fun to get some of those students actually out on the ground helping with restoration projects. And beyond that, we have really programs for K through 12. So we do after school program, wheat weeks, and summer camps for more the elementary students. And then we have our kids in the snow and kids in the forest from middle school, getting a kids in the orchard program going as well. That's also currently for middle school. And then Kids in the Creek for high school. That program's been around for about 30 years now, and it's been really successful. So the other thing, just real quick, is we are hosting a conservation fair at Pybus Market on March 25th, and that's going to be from 3 to 6 for the actual fair. It's a great chance to come and meet our staff and learn more about our programs, and we'll have fun family activities. So bring kids if you have them. There will be refreshments, and you can also vote in our Board of Supervisors election during that time. And then if you'd like to stay, we're hosting a Pybus U class on prescribed fire. So lots going on March 25th. There's little information on how to get in touch with us. And like I said before, reach out if you have any concerns or questions, and we have a lot of different programs, so we likely can help you, but even if we can't, we're happy to connect you with a partner. And I will turn it over to Kirk.
All right, well, welcome everybody. And you probably all know this since you all registered for this session, but we have 3 more coming up the rest of the week, every Wednesday. Mel Asher, the owner of Derby Canyons, will be speaking next week as kind of really how to get started for anyone who is really at the beginner stage. And then the following week, Natalie McClendon, a board member of the Wenatchee Natural Plant Society, is going to, or Washington Native Plant Society, will be talking about how she's transforming her city lot that was pretty much nothing there until she's putting native plants in it. And then Al Murphy, a retired forester and wildfire expert, is going to talk on the 26th about native plants and how to suit them in for our changing environment. On May 10th, we're going to have an in-person native plant workshop. It'll be in Peshastin. It'll be limited to 25 people. The only way you can sign up is if you attend one of these sessions. And I'll put that into the sign-up registration form in the chat here in just a second. And it will be a lottery, although the last couple of years we've had exactly 25 people register, so everybody won the lottery. But it'll be really cool. We'll go through a bunch of plants. All the speakers will be there, and they'll provide us their opinions about the benefits and drawbacks of different native plants. So tonight, we're really honored to have Betsy return to us. And this year, she's going to talk about the plant-soil relationship. And so Betsy is a trained Wenatchee-based, Purdue-educated landscape horticulturist and designer. She specializes in native plants. She also teaches in the continuing ed program at the Wenatchee Valley College and occasionally gives public lectures on native plants like the one tonight, and the importance of those plants. And she's always great to have her as a speaker, and very entertaining talk as well as informative. So Betsy, we'll turn this over to you.
All right, Kirk. Uh-oh, what did I just do? Hold on.
That was me.
Okay. Hold on. Let me try again. Share screen. There. There it is. Okay, welcome everybody. And this is the first time that I've included Spanish, so it's English and then Spanish below it, and they're combined, so it looks a little busier than usual, but the English is usually in black and the Spanish is either purple or a light pink, depending on the background. So I'm going to talk about the relationship between plants and soil, and it may get if you get a little overwhelmed, I think I put a note in the chat that I'm going to send the PDF to Kirk and he can send it out to everybody. So, because there's a lot of information. I tried to wean it down, but there's still a lot of information. So we're just going to start with, hold on. If I can get this to go. Can I get it to, there we go. So understanding the soil structure. So if you're gonna, plant or amend your soil based on the kind of soil you have, it's really important to kind of know what kind of soil you have. So because plants are adapted to specific soils, some of them are widely adapted, but others are pretty restricted in what they like. So then we're going to talk about soil to start with. Basic soil texture, a lot of you probably know this, but there's only 3 particles in soil. When people talk about organic matter, that's not part of soil. Soil is just sand, silt, and clay, and it goes from coarse particles to very fine particles. And we'll see in a minute that the kind of soil you have depends on the proportion of those particle sizes in your soil. But in brief, we all know what sand feels like. It's like gritty, right? And silts feel soft, silky, or flowery. And clays feel sticky when they're wet and they're hard to squeeze. And I am most familiar with the until I moved to Wenatchee, I was most familiar with clay because of where I grew up and where I spent a lot of years. So there are positives and minuses in all the soil types. And briefly, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but fine textured soils, which are the ones with high clay content, hold more water. So once you get them wet, they hold the water, but they have low oxygen holding capacity, which means they don't have the space in between for oxygen to live. So you think about things like root rot that is more likely in a high clay soil. And then the sand soils, the sandy or the real silty soils, have high permeability, which means basically water runs through them, and therefore they have a low water holding capacity. So they're really only suited for well-adapted plant species. However, one thing I'm going to talk about is if you want to grow a plant that's not really ideally suited for your particular soil type, then you can go ahead and amend the soil. And I talk about some ways to do that. And then there are the medium textured soils, which are the loams that are suitable for the growth of most plants. And then caveat there is that if you take plants that grow naturally, say in our shrub step, and you put them in a nice loamy soil, they're going to do things that you don't want them to do, like grow too tall and flop over and be like, what am I going to do with all these nutrients that I'm not used to? So this is just a little chart. So you can see here, clays are on top, sand on the left, silt on the right. My yard would be the bottom corner there, where it's either sand or a loamy sand. And the soil type is just a percentage of each kind. So mine has mostly sand and maybe a tiny bit of clay, but not much else. And I added this in because I think it's really important for everyone to understand that in the Wenatchee Valley and in the Yakima Valley, even though we're not talking about crops or growing crops tonight, it's still important to know that you just assume that your soil is contaminated with lead and arsenic. So if you're digging the soil with your hands, which I have a habit of doing, make sure you wash your hands. Try to, it's contaminated. And if you're thinking about gardening in a certain area, you need to think twice about it. Probably grow in planter boxes. So that's that. It's just really important because it is very, very widespread. Okay, so I wasn't going to talk about this initially, and then a friend of mine who does research said, what do you mean you're not going to talk about mycorrhiza? So here we are talking about mycorrhiza. And basically all mycorrhiza are is a symbiotic relationship between roots and fungus, various fungi. And the fungus can either grow inside of the plant cells or on the outside, kind of fuzzy looking. And it turns out they're actually super important for survival and growth of, it said 90% of plant species, so for a lot of plant species, and they can do a lot of beneficial things. So they colonize the root tissues, like I said, either intra or extracellularly, so either on the inside or the outside, and enhance a plant's ability to survive in various environments. Lots of different kinds of mycorrhiza, but they all have significant impacts on plant health. And they have a lot of benefits. So they make plants more resilient to stresses such as drought, which is, yeah, that's pretty cool. That will become more and more important, and it's become important over the last few years for certain. They help plants defend themselves against soil and root-borne pathogens. They stabilize soil structure. So soil structure sounds fancy, but it's basically just the soil particles are all stacked together. And if, say, my yard is sand and all these big soil particles are all stacked together, they're not very stable. But if you have a clay soil, the clay is bound together more tightly and it's more stable. So mycorrhiza can make something like roots within a sandy soil more stable. They increase the soil's water holding capacity again in say a sandy soil. That's a very positive thing, very helpful. And in contaminated soils, and I'm glad I mentioned the lead and arsenic, they can help the plant not take up toxins or have the toxins build up in their plant tissues. So there's a positive benefits. And it turns out there are a lot of immobile nutrients, phosphorus, zinc, etc. And the mycorrhizal make these more available to the plant. So helping with plant nutrition. So plants can get the nutrients they need so they can do what they need to do. And also they can stimulate the production of plant hormones, which if you don't know, plants do have hormones, and a lot of you probably know about rooting hormones, where if you want to, take a cutting and dip it in rooting hormone to grow a new plant, use that. But plant hormones are also responsible for the height, for plants growing. They're really important. I did my project in high school biology on plant hormones. So it's super fun. They're really important. And they support a variety of plant species in different ecosystems, and you know that a diverse and stable ecosystem is really important. So they're super helpful. So what can you as a homeowner, as a gardener or landscaper do? So first of all, the mycorrhizal fungi are found in most soils. Having a healthy, diverse group of plants encourages their growth. And the first thing you can do is don't use synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, or fungicides, because those throw everything out of whack. And most of us know that. And then how to encourage them, minimize soil disturbance. So if you look in the picture there, that's basically compost thrown on the ground as a mulch or for planting in. So in the old days, people would routinely till before they planted, and then they realized that soil is so important. Every time you till, you're disrupting the soil structure, and you're also making erosion and wind erosion and water erosion more likely. So we want to try to minimize soil disturbance wherever possible. And then you're going to use a compost. I say compost, but when I say compost, I mean basically any well composted organic product as a soil amendment. And this is going to be really important in disturbed sites. Maybe there's a construction site where there's just a bunch of gravel or rubble or exposed, and there's not any good soil to speak of. So you can use compost. And you can also use a liquid or granular mycorrhizal inoculant. So you can do it when you transplant, or you can use a drench around existing plants. And this is the first year that I'm going to try some. So I ordered some, I got them in the mail. I'm pretty excited. I don't know if you can see it, but I was telling Kirk that my yard tends to be kind of a plant things in the sand and see how they do. I don't amend the soil. Haven't used mycorrhiza. But when you are thinking about what you want to grow, and if the plants you want to grow aren't exactly suited to your soil types, you can do things to make them do better. So let's talk about each of the soil types. And I'm really focusing here on what I call the problematic soil types, which is, let me go back. Anybody have any questions about mycorrhiza? We good? Questions? Yeah, it's fungi and roots. Okay, let's go on then. So benefits and challenges of each soil type. And like I said, I'm focusing on the ones that are really, I would call them problematic. So the clays, for example, the house I grew up in Northeast Ohio, our yard was solid clay because the glaciers came along and they scraped all the topsoil and dumped it south. And it was just sheets of clay. And in the summer, it would crack. We'd have cracks like an inch wide in the yard. And over time, as more organic matter got added to it, the soil improved. But That's one extreme. And the other extreme is kind of what I'm living with now, is the sand. The loams or the loamy soils in the middle are kind of what we think of as good soils. So I'm not going to be focusing too much on them at all, just on the problematic ones. Okay, so again, I said there are English is on the top, Spanish is on the bottom, but the fine textured soils, so clay, basically. Like I said, it has a ability to hold water, which is great in our dry climate or during a drought. It holds on to soil nutrients longer, so it's more fertile. And it is more structurally stable, which I mentioned earlier, which helps prevent erosion and protect soil health. Now, on the bad side of that, I mentioned waterlogged soil, especially in the spring, if you have a low area where the snow melts or we have heavy rains and it's clay and it sits there and it'll stay wet longer. And that can lead to root rot. No good. Again, the low oxygen holding capacity, and especially on a construction site, say you haven't fenced off an area and people are driving skid steers or loaders or trucks and they're just compacting the soil, and that actually destroys the soil structure. So roots can't penetrate it as easily. So that's more of a problem with clay than with any other soil. Of course, it's easier to drive on clay than it would be to drive on sand. So that's, like I said, there's pluses and minuses of each of the soil types. And again, and this is one reason I love living here so much with my sandy yard, because if you have clay, even just planting a little perennial can be a nightmare. And planting a tree, a big, balled and burlap tree, it's a project. It's very hard to plant in, and you can't work it when it's wet, because if you work with it when it's wet, we all know we made pottery when we were kids or even as adults, and it's not good. You're destroying the soil structure. So that's clay. Now, the loams, which I said are the good soils, right? They're nutrient rich. They have a lot of air pockets, so roots can get to soil and they can get to water and oxygen. And the open soil structure provides ideal habitat for the soil microbiome, which, in other words, the mycorrhiza and whatever bacteria and other things are living in the soil. The only downside, which I already mentioned, is that if you're taking plants that, say, from our shrub step that are used to growing in gravel or sand or in conditions where they have very, very few nutrients and water is, hard to come by, you put them in a loam soil, they're not gonna behave normally. You'll be like, why is my rabbit brush 10 feet tall or whatever? I'm exaggerating, but it can be a problem. But that's really the only issue. I would avoid, if you have a loamy soil, I would really avoid the super, super tough shrub step plants. And then the sand or silts, coarse textured soils. So they drain well, which is great. They're quick to warm up in spring, which is something I really never thought about, but they do. They hold the warmth. Root growth is phenomenal. They promote root growth, and it kind of makes sense that a lot of our natives have those tap roots. Say a little snow buckwheat, a couple months old, will have a tap root 6 inches long, and if you go to the older plants, they have these massive tap roots, and because they can move very easily through a sandy soil. You can work very readily with sand. I mean, I can go out if there had been a heavy rain, I could still go out and dig holes and plant if I wanted to. On the downside, they dry out very, very quickly, and they don't hold nutrients, and also they can erode very easily. So when we talk about the right plant in the right place, normally we're thinking about, plant height, sunshade, water, but soil type needs to play a part in that. So let's take a look at some of them. And I want to give the caveat that I have some kind of guidelines and lists of plants, but I'm not going to go into great detail about the plants because tonight I'm really focusing on the soil and, the relationship. Okay, so for clay soils, and let me preface this by saying, well, There are some plants that you're going to see I put on both lists because there are some plants that are widely adaptable. Serviceberry, common snowberry. These plants exist in a broad range of environments and they are very readily adaptable. Others aren't so adaptable, so they might only be on one list. And I will also preface this by saying that these are my opinions and my experiences. So that doesn't mean you can't try. But in general, plants with for clay soils that have a spreading or a fibrous root system will be more tolerant of clay soils, as will plants that need more moisture. And again, because the clay soil holds the moisture, if a plant needs more moisture, it's going to be like, oh yeah, I hit the jackpot, just waiting for that, to use up all the moisture in the soil. And I already said that some plants are widely adaptable. And also don't forget that your site's sun, shade, and precipitation are just as important or probably as important as the soil. But some clay plants for clay soils would include probably all the maples, Douglas hawthorn, like I said, serviceberry, kinnikinick, Oregon grape, red osier dogwood, which does not like sandy soils unless you're going to give it a lot of water. Ocean spray, mock orange, bitter cherry, and then choke cherry, golden currant, red flowering currant, Sculler's willow, blue elderberry, and common snowberry. That's the trees and shrubs. And then over here, I've got a lot of the grasses. The only one I didn't add to this list, well, there's a couple I didn't include, but bottlebrush, squirreltail, pine grass would definitely prefer clay soil over sandy soil. Prairie June grass, basin wild rye, again, that's probably a preference of it because of the moisture issue, unless it's a wet sandy area. And then some of the perennials like the pearl everlasting, because it is a spreader, it can do fine in that. It can compete, and yarrow does well anywhere. Spreading dogbane, red columbine, and this is a case, the red columbine and the goat's beard both need a certain level of moisture and some shade, and the goat's beard needs full shade. So again, you're not just thinking about the soil, you're thinking about the combination of factors. You have what's your soil moisture and what are the sudden shade conditions, and then what kind of soil do I have, and can the plants cope with that? Showy milkweed will probably grow in anything. Fireweed likes a little extra moisture, etc., etc. Again, these are based on my experience and my opinions. And then for sandy soil, so in general, plants that have a deep taproot, or extensive root systems will be more tolerant of sandy soils. And also the plants that are very drought tolerant, or mostly are very drought tolerant. And some of them are species native to sandy or gravelly soil. So if you see something growing in sand or gravel and you don't know anything about it, you can pretty much assume that it's going to work in your sandy soil if you have sandy soil. And then some of the plants that have adaptations to minimize water loss, say like the buckwheats have like snow buckwheat has the fuzzy gray leaves. That is an adaptation to help the plants not lose as much water. So if you see the fuzzy leaves or the gray leaves or some other thing that's helping the plant conserve water, then you're like, you're probably going to be good in sandy soil. And again, a lot of these plants are the same as the previous list, but the gray rabbit brush, you're not going to want to grow that in clay soil or in a loam soil. The smooth sumac, if you had a loam soil, it's probably going to take over. Wax currant is definitely more droughty. Purple sage, that's definitely a shrub step kind of plant. So those are the plants that are really ideally suited for sandy soil and the sun, and etc. And the grasses and perennials, there's only a couple of changes to the list in that Indian rice grass I didn't put in the other list because it is so drought tolerant. And I added blue bunch wheatgrass because it's native to our shrub steppe. So it needs those conditions. And then you're going to look at a lot of really gorgeous flowers, like the threadleaf fleabane. That's a picture of threadleaf fleabane. the buckwheats, hairy goldmaster, which is a personal favorite of mine, which I think is dramatically underused. And then several of the penstemons do really well in sandy soil. And then orange globe mallow. So any questions about plants or about the soil types, or any questions so far? I know I'm zipping through this. There's a lot of material. We good? Okay. So why would you amend your soil? So that the first answer is that if you want to grow plants that aren't well adapted to your particular soil type, you can always amend your soil with organic matter. My particular case, I think I said that my yard is kind of a horticultural experiment. So I don't amend the soil. I kind of want to see what it does in sandy soil, what particular plants do. But if you want to kind of spread the range and say, okay, I would like to grow this, but it really needs a soil with higher organic matter content, then you can add that. And we'll talk about how you do that in planting. So adding that can kind of expand the range of plants you put in your soil. Okay. All right. So how to amend clay soil? So basically these rules are going to apply to amending sandy soil as well. And I don't talk about loamy soil in this because there doesn't seem to loamy soils don't really need amending, I would say, unless you're using them for crops or something that's really depleting a lot of the nutrients. And then you can, top dress them with compost or whatever to give them that extra boost. Okay, so basically you're going to add compost, which would be you can have compost of manure or leaf mold, which is basically compost from leaves, before planting or with planting. We'll talk about especially coming up. Or you use it as a top dressing throughout this growing season, just like you would in your veggie garden. Like my veggies, I'll start with a couple of inches of worm compost on top. And then that's a lot of nutrients. But, as we get into July, late July, sometime when you've got a lot of plants growing, there's a lot of demand, they're using up the nutrients, then I'll just put another layer of worm compost on that and give them that nutrient boost. It's the same thing. If you have plants that really need those nutrients, you just use it as a top dressing. When I say top dressing, you're basically just putting more compost around the root zone. You're not actually putting it up against the plants ever. You're just adding it on top. And our friends, the worms and the beetles and all that will get that. They'll get that organic matter and they'll pull it down into the soil. So not only you'll get the nutrients, but it'll help with the soil structure for the problematic clay soil and the sandy soil. And then if you mulch, if you're a mulcher, I would say I don't like to use more than 2 inches of mulch. And I'm talking about a bark or a shredded bark mulch or a pine nugget or something like that around new plants. And that will help prevent compaction. And again, add organic matter to the soil because eventually they will decompose. It can take a long time, but in this climate, but if you live in an area that has a fair amount of rain, mulches decompose a lot more quickly. And again, so cover crops. There's a lot of text in here, but don't be distracted. Cover crops are used for very kind of specific situations. Helping prevent soil erosion is a big one, and that can apply if, say, you have a new home construction and it's maybe taking more than one season, maybe a couple, 3 seasons, and there's a lot of disruption to the soil, like soil's being moved around, there's a septic field being put in, regrading is happening. You want to maintain that soil, prevent the soil from eroding. At the same time, you can add organic matter and improve the soil structure. So pretty much cover crops are annuals, generally speaking. And there's 3 that the ways we use them, it also affects the timing. So if, say, you have exposed soil right now and you want to plant later in the spring before summer, you're like, okay, I'm gonna plant my cover crops as soon as the soil can be worked. And these are recommendations specific to the Columbia Basin, so these should work for most of us. And then what that produces, the plants grow as much as possible, and then you can use a weed whip or you can mow, and then you can just plant right into there without disturbing the soil. If you think back a few minutes ago to we were talking about the mycorrhiza, we're talking about not disturbing the soil. So if you're stabilizing the soil with a cover crop, doesn't make sense to me. If you're going to go in and till it in, I think it would be better to mow it somehow and then plant in that, because those are annuals and they're dying. You're going to mow them before they go to seed. And then you're going to plant right in, and you have that, it's called green manure, worked right into the soil. Now you can also use the cover crops, so you can mow and then add them to the soil in the fall. And those you should plant by August 15th. But the other really important use, I think, for us would be soil erosion prevention, like I talked about. And you want to plant those around mid-September so they get established and they can grow and they can hold the soil all through the winter. And it's probably more important. Well, this hasn't been much of a winter for those of us at lower elevations, but it would still be important because it was so dry, and that would help add organic matter to the soil. So amending sandy soils is basically pretty much the same thing that we just talked about. So but you're with different benefits. You're going to add organic matter and you're going to improve the nutrient retention. So if you have the organic matter mixed in with the soil, nutrients have something to hold on to and they're more available. And it also increases the water holding capacity and the mycorrhiza, which is it's all kind of tied together when you start thinking about it. And I said, use the guidelines I just showed you for same as amending clay soil. So it'll help out a lot. So any questions on that? Okay. Okay, now planting tips. So this is where it gets a little.
Oh, hey, Betsy.
Okay,
Yeah,
hi.
yeah. There are a couple of questions in the chat. So
okay, let me go there.
Can you see it, or I can read them to you?
I thought I saw them and now they're gone.
Yeah.
Okay, can you tell me them, Kirk?
Yeah, you bet. So Jennifer said she planted some smooth sumac and what she thinks is loamy soil in Wenatchee, and it's taking over. What do you
Yes.
suggest on how do you suggest controlling it?
Jennifer, is it in an enclosed area where it can't spread out of control?
Hi, Betsy.
Hi. Oh, hi, Jennifer. We know each other. So
we do. Yes, it is.
It's
somewhat controlled, but it's next to actually what is a egress window, and I actually have seen it go all the way down, however many feet that is, 4
crazy.
feet, and then come. And I was like, oh my goodness, after a year, so I'm quite worried about it. So it is somewhat controlled, but I'm concerned it's going to, just go into anything it can.
So first thing I would do is never water it. Make sure it's not getting water. That's probably the simplest thing to do. And the second thing would be to kind of increase the physical barrier. So where you see it's kind of invading, maybe put in some extra, I'm thinking like the cheap concrete steppers that you can bury sideways. Find a way to try to block it. Try to redirect it. Because it will in the wrong soil. It's like I'm a psychic saying that, but it can be crazy. So good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And Susan asked, how do you work with acidic soils and native plants? She has ponderosa pine and sandy soils.
So the thing I always think about the pH of a soil is that pH is a logarithmic scale. So if you take yourself back to high school algebra, meaning that it takes an awful lot of a soil acidifier to actually change the pH, and it's not necessarily permanent. So, and I wouldn't, if she's worried about planting under a ponderosa, I actually wouldn't plant under a ponderosa because that's one species that really likes its space. So I would just like let it have its needles and have that kind of soil thing. But otherwise, I don't think using pine needles as a mulch anywhere is going to have any significant impact on us on other plants. They should be just fine because we have pretty neutral soil around here. Neutral is slightly basic, so it's not really going to change much of anything.
What are your thoughts on using lime?
I was reading up on that because I was like, because my dad used to use lime on our solid clay yard in Northeast Ohio, but I wouldn't. From what I was reading when I was prepping for this, it's not going to do what you think it's going to do. Really, really the big solution to most of our soil problems is to add organic matter. That's probably the best thing to do.
Right. Lacey said, do I understand correctly that I probably do not need traditional store-bought fertilizers for these plants if I'm using compost twice a year as a top dressing?
That is absolutely right. And in fact, depending on the native plants you're using, Lacey, you don't want to give them too much nutrition. You just want to let them find the nutrients in the soil. That's the most important thing yeah, we don't want to help them out in any way. Good.
Okay. That's it.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to talk about planting. So we've talked about potentially adding compost or other organic matter to your soil, but how do you plant in heavy clay, for instance, or how do you plant in sand? So those are the two that I'm going to address. And like I said, I spent a lot of years in places, including working design build, where there was heavy clay. And the most important thing to know about planting in heavy clay, and I kind of modified this drawing here, you can see the most important thing if you're planting trees and shrubs is you want to plant, if you have heavy clay, or if you have a clay, you want to plant 2 to 3 inches, the top of the root ball, 2 to 3 inches. I know I have text here and that'll help you break it down specifically, but 2 to 3 inches above the existing grade. So what you're actually going to do is you're going to plant high, and then you're going to backfill with the soil that you took out and mix in a bunch of compost, and you're going to tamp it down with your feet. There's always, I like to dance when I plant trees. You kind of dance on it because you don't want big air pockets. The soil structure does not include large air pockets. Soil structure is all the soil particles all packed together. So you always want to do that. And you're going to add that organic matter as much as you want, really, but you're going to mix it with the native clay. And then you're going to build that up to the edge of a root ball. Can you guys see my hands? I'm kind of showing you. So you're going to have the root ball here, and then you're going to build the soil up. You're going to kind of just build it up a little bit. So the plant, the top of the root ball will be up here, but then the soil will you're going to kind of feather it up from the adjacent grade. So that pulls your root ball a little bit. And what that does, along with the compost, is allows those feeder roots to kind of get started, and they have space to grow. And the other thing is you want to dig a hole that's 2 to 3 times as wide as the top of the root ball or the growing container if you're planting in clay, because that gives them, instead of having that hard surface we were talking about where the roots have trouble penetrating, you're going to open that up a little bit. You're not going to completely replace it. If you take out all the native soil and fill in with topsoil or some other soil, you're asking for trouble, because that's it's called the bathtub effect. It kind of, the roots are kind of restricted to this area, but you want to really open it up. I mean, we're talking like a really wide saucer on top. So that gives those roots those young roots. Remember, plants grow new root cells every day, unless the ground is frozen. So they're always growing and they're always searching. And keep it high. And then the other thing is the bottom can be fairly shallow because you're not super concerned about the bottom. You want those roots on top to grow. So that's in clay soil, a tree, and trees and shrubs pretty much. But so again, 2 to 3 inches above existing grade, and that depends on how bad the clay soil is. And then you're going to water, you're going to tamp it down, and you're going to water the heck out of it. You want to kind of leave a little bit of a saucer there, not too much, but enough that you can hold the water in so the water's not running around everywhere. And then for the perennials, grasses, and ground covers, you're gonna plant so that the top is about 1/2 inch above existing grade, just slightly, just to give it that little bit of an edge. And you obviously don't need gigantic holes, but it's the same principle where you're gonna dig a hole a little bit wider at the top, and you're gonna, as you backfill, you're gonna work in your compost with the soil that came out of it, because you don't want to drastically go to a completely different soil type. You want to have a mix that's going to add that organic matter back into the soil, and it does all those good things that we talked about. So that's how you do it. And then sandy soil, and this was new to me because our yard is so sandy that you can't like dig a post hole. It just fills in. It's just okay. So my husband came up with a creative solution when we had to put some posts in that he actually put a 5-gallon bucket, like put it in there, and was able to do that. But apparently, and I learned this, if you wet the soil, if you have a very sandy soil and you wet it before you start digging, you kind of stabilize it, and then you can dig a little bit, and then you can wet it again, fill the hole, and dig more and wet it again, and that stabilizes the hole. So I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And now, unlike the planting in heavy clay, you're going to kind of do the opposite when you're planting in sand. So you want the planting hole to be 2 to 3 inches deeper than the root ball, but the same width. You want that nice big wide hole for trees and shrubs. But the thing is, you're not going to fill it. You're not going to, bury the plant. You're not going to cover the root flare there. What you're actually going to do, if you think of it as a saucer, you want to create a saucer. So in the sand, we want that plant to kind of acquire and accumulate as much water as possible, because that water is going to percolate through and it'll be gone. So if you plant everything in a saucer, each plant is going to collect as much water as it can. Okay, it's just a little trick to kind of, okay, if there's rain, it's going to kind of gather here, and yay, get a little more water. But you're going to do the same thing when you're backfilling with you. If it's not, a super shrub step plant that can, if it's not snow buckwheat or rabbit brush that can live through anything that the sand can throw at it, but if it's something else where you kind of extending the range or pushing the boundaries of that plant, add some compost in just like you did with the clay. But again, and you're going to compact it. You're not compacting it because you're not a truck or a heavy machinery. You're not going to hurt it, but you're getting rid of air pockets in there. And then you're going to keep doing that, and you're going to really water the heck out of that. But you want to end up, every plant will have a saucer around it to hold extra water, which reminds me, it seems like planting berms are coming back into vogue. So if you're thinking about using a berm, you want to make sure the top is not just flat, but it actually is kind of saucer shaped. So it would be hard to hold water on top of a planting berm. It just run off, right? So, but if you create that slight well to hold water, remember, we live in a desert and we have hot, dry conditions, and our summers are hotter and drier every year, and we want to kind of maximize what you're doing with the water. So that's another thing to think about too, if you're doing that. So same thing with perennials, grasses, ground covers, plant them a little bit deep, like 1/2 inch deep, give them each that kind of little well. And the other thing, And that holds true even in my yard. You know, we're, I don't know, a mile from the Columbia, have something like that, but still there's a slope. And you don't really notice the slope until you water, and everything runs toward the river. And whether you're on a slight slope or you have a bigger slope, you want to use something like I mentioned, cobblestones. I actually have the little garden blocks when I put new plants in on the down slope. I always put a couple in there and try to create that saucer so you can water and all the water's not immediately going to run away. Your goal is to try to get the plants to have as much water as they can. Okay. Running out to, so watering. Any questions on planting? Nope. We're good?
Not seeing any yet. So, yep.
Okay. All right. And then watering tips. So it's going to depend on your plant's needs, soil type, and the weather. So how to water in clay soil. So I'm only going to talk about clay and the sand. Again, loamy soils, you know, it's like the Goldilocks of soils. So if you know how to water in clay and how to water in sand, you can kind of figure out the rest. Clay soil needs to be watered less frequently. So this is the water less but more deeply soil. If you have a clay or a clay loam where there's a fairly high concentration of soil of clay in it, and that will hold the water, and your plants will grow roots and they will go looking for that soil moisture. So you don't want to water every day if you have clay. That's the first thing. And the other thing is, if you do overwater, or if you look outside and you go, "Ooh, my plants look like they're drying out, they're dying," the symptoms of drought stress and drowning for a plant are basically the same. If you look at a plant's wilting, it's doing all this stuff. Yeah, unless you check the soil moisture, you don't know what's really going on. Because you may have been overwatering and then you think, oh my gosh, I guess I'm not watering enough. And then, add insult to injury by throwing more water at the plant when it actually just needs to dry out. So I would recommend kind of letting your soil dry out between waterings if you have clay soil. Encourage those roots to grow deeper and stronger. And talk about irrigation really quickly. If you have an irrigation system and you put in you're using a drip irrigation with emitters, make sure that you are checking those emitters on a regular basis, at least every season, because sometimes people are surprised that plants actually grow. And as they grow, the root zone gets bigger, right? Especially trees get bigger and bigger, and you go see a tree and it's just got like a couple tiny emitters right at the base of the tree, when actually there's a whole root zone out here that if you're going to water, you need to do that. So that should be kind of an annual thing where you check the emitters. Do you need to size up in emitters? Are they hitting, what do you need to do? And then let's talk about weather and watering. So spring is here. If you have irrigation and if you turn on your irrigation system, you want to start watering as minimally as possible, as little as possible. Okay. But as the weather heats up, then you can add more time, you can add more waterings as we get hotter and drier. But if you start full bore watering everything all the time, you can't undo that. You can only undo it at the beginning of every season. So watering, you really need to exercise moderation at the beginning of the season, and that gives you a lot more room to maneuver as it gets hot out. And you can say, okay, yeah, I need to definitely be watering longer, or maybe add another watering a week. And if it gets crazy hot, maybe you're watering, every 3 days or something, but that's really important. And then the opposite holds true in late summer. As the nighttime temperatures start to finally cool down, you want to start cutting back on irrigation. This is especially important for those of you with irrigation systems that suddenly get shut off in like early October. So you kind of want to prepare your plants. You want to say, late August, or hopefully before then when it starts cooling down a little. Start cutting back on the time and then cutting back on the number of waterings that you're doing. It's really important. Okay. And then so watering in sandy soil, and I should know you have to water more frequently because it doesn't hold, the sandy soil does not hold the soil moisture. And something I hadn't thought about, but water in sandy soil basically moves straight down. It doesn't spread like it will in a clay soil. It doesn't, hit these roots here and there. So it's really important in sandy soil to make sure either your soaker hose or your emitters on your irrigation system are directly above the root zone, because it's just going to run down. And the same thing, as plants grow, you can change and add emitters and relocate existing ones. You need to be hitting the whole root zone. And then again, so you especially with sandy soil, but I think with clay soil also, when you first start irrigating, you want to dig down to make sure that the plant is getting water. After your first time running the irrigation system, say, go out there and just take a little trowel and dig down. You want to make sure that that water is getting down there and it's hitting the root zones. And there's some more information here. But again, as the summer heats up, you can increase the number of waterings, maybe add more time to your waterings. And this is going to, I know a lot of people like to set it and go for irrigation systems, but it really doesn't work that way. With plants, you need to kind of build that relationship where you can tell, it's really getting crazy out there. Let me see if anybody needs extra water. And then again, as we head to late summer and hopefully nighttime temperatures start cooling down, you start cutting back, and then plants are ready when there's no more water or fall hits or early frost or something else. They are ready for it. And that's it. So I got a couple sources there, but any questions?
Yeah, so Lacey asked if you have clay soil, are there any native plants that are truly drought tolerant that I may not need to water at all and they will make it through the summer?
So I would say because, well, first of all, you always have to water to get plants established. That's true for almost anything. I would say, and in general, assume you're going to water for the first 2 seasons, except for snow buckwheat, rabbit brush, any of the super drought tolerant shrub step plants, they will, I haven't watered my snow buckwheat since the first season I had it, and it does just fine. But given that our summers are getting hotter and drier, and if you drive around or you out in nature, you notice that, hey, even plants that are mature trees and mature shrubs out in the wild are stressed from the heat and the lack of water. I wouldn't do that to plants in your landscape. If they're in your landscape, you spend a lot of time and money putting them in there. And I would definitely advocate for, even if you just have to water them every couple weeks, or when conditions get really hot, even after they're well established. So I would do that. Best time of day to water in the desert here, I like to water at night, because then your plants have all night, that soil, that moisture can, they can take care of that, they can use the water all night long before it, evaporates. And even if soil's going into the moisture is going into the soil, and if the surface is really hot, say if you think, oh, I'm going to water early morning, but it's going to heat up really quickly. We all live here. We know how hot it can get. By mid-morning, it can be, 90 degrees. So I water at night so that my plants have time to kind of use that soil, and that moisture, and doesn't all evaporate. So for me, that's the best.
Betsy, there was a question from Susan right above that about cover crops.
Let's see. Let me pull this up.
Want me to read it to you?
Yeah.
Cover crops, what kinds for sandy soil and where can I buy them? Buy the seeds.
Okay, so if you've heard me lecture before, you probably heard me mention Northwest Meadowscapes. So northwestmeadowscapes.com, they sell some annuals, including grasses and annual clovers and other things that can be used as cover crops. So that would be a starting point for me. And they've got a lot of information. You could also try one of the farm stores, like if you're looking for like an annual rye or something like that.
What do you think of daikon, radish, and those sort of things for cover crops?
So I think the radish, so I don't know, because when I think of culinary species, I always think that you want to like eat them, right? Even if they're just sprouts, you want to like I sprout things in jars all the time, all winter long, but I probably wouldn't, because those are not going to be the cheapest seeds for one thing. Whereas like a clover, an annual clover or an annual grass will be probably much cheaper. Anything else? Am I missing any?
I'm not seeing any others. Anybody else have one? All right, and so, Betsy said earlier she'll get a PDF of the presentation, so I'll get that out to everybody. This is being recorded, as you know, and we'll get that posted, and I'll send a link out to that as well.
2 new messages. Are there questions? Let me check these real quick.
I see thank yous.
Oh, you're welcome. It's okay.
All right. Well, everybody have a good evening then. So.
And thanks for joining us. Bye.
See you next week.
Thank you, Betsy.
All right.
Good job. Good job, Betsy.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Betsy.
Have a good night, everybody.
Have a great night. Thanks. Yeah, that.
Hey, Al, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Good
Good.
job. That was a good job Betsy did. Oh,
yeah, she right this. Looking forward to yours.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one. You'll be very surprised.
Okay.
It's right. something like I've never done before.
Okay. Sounds good. All right.
I hope it works.
All right. We'll find out.
Yeah,
I'm sure it'll be great. I'm sure it'll be great.
Okie doke. Will you take it easy?
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.